ahead and call this meeting of the Common Council Executive in order. Karen,
right.
can you call the roll?
President Furman?
Present.
Vice President Curry?
Here.
Alder Bennett? Alder Conklin?
Present.
Alder Figueroa Cole?
Here.
Alder Foster? Alder Heck?
Here.
Alder Abbas? You have quorum.
Great, thank you. Do we have any public comments signed up for today?
We do not.
Okay, so then we will move right on to approval of minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Second.
Anybody have any questions, clarifications, corrections of the October 20th and September 15th minutes? Not seeing any, I will assume approval by unanimous consent and move on to our first item on the agenda, which is public comment. It sounds like we don't have any, so then we will move on to disclosures and recusals. Do any members of the body have any required disclosures or recusals? All right, perfect. Moving right along. Items for consideration. Agenda item 273, Registrar File 73982, which is creating section 3.22 and amending section 3.001 to prohibit subunit meetings and public information meetings from meeting on nights when the Common Council is prohibited by ordinance from conducting meetings. Attorney Haas is here with us this evening. It is my understanding from something I heard just today that this may be completely unnecessary. So Attorney Haas, do you want to let the Common Council Executive Committee know what's going on with this particular item?
Sure. I just want to let the committee know I'm also monitoring / participating in the Civilian Oversight Board. So if there's a delay in my response, that's why. But I don't think this ordinance is completely unnecessary. What we discovered after I drafted it is that I was not looking at a more recent update the council had done regarding scheduling meetings. So the ordinances already prohibit BCCs from meeting on holidays that the council does not meet, but they do. This ordinance also addresses agency public information meetings, and so that is not in the current ordinance. And so I think that subsection, well, the second subdivision would not be necessary, but the first part is currently not in the ordinances.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess having it in both places, though, there's no harm in that. It makes it easier for people to find. I mean, so if we left it with this amendment, it helps. I mean, you know, this amendment obviously talks about budget meetings not being held on budget meetings. So adding in holidays to it gives you kind of an all-in-one place to be able to go, oh, well, committees also can't do that. And we can't have those particular meetings. So sure. There's probably no harm in approving this, even if it wasn't totally necessary.
Correct. I would agree with that.
Okay. And that's not just because you made the mistake, right?
Thank
you. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I was just curious about the budget meeting component of it when Finance Committee is considering the budget. Would that include the informational presentations that agencies make for 2 days on each budget? Because the Finance Committee isn't really considering the budgets at that point. I guess they're asking questions of the operating and capital budgets.
A great question, Alder Heck.
I don't know what the current practice has been regarding those sessions.
I'm going to look back at the calendar and see if I can figure that out real quickly.
While Alder Heck does a little bit of research, anybody else have any questions about this?
there have been, for instance, when the operating budget was presented at 2 successive meetings, the Police and Fire Commission met, and there were a couple of other committees that were scheduled to meet but canceled. Not sure why they canceled, but and then when we considered the capital budget or heard those budget hearings, only the Police and Fire Commission met for the capital consideration in September. So it looks like some bodies have been meeting.
Thank you, Alder Heck. I think I want to have a discussion on that. Alder Paulson, do you want to discuss that, or do you have a question?
I have a question that's unrelated. Sure. If a committee or body, if a committee has a meeting on one of these dates that's prohibited, do we have anything like their actions are void and they have to redo anything, or if that's just like, oops, you missed that one, and please don't do that again?
Right. There is no penalty stated, but I think we would be, counting on staff to make sure we alert those committees that they're not supposed to be scheduling meetings on those dates.
Can we come up with creative punishments? Sorry, Alder Paulson, go ahead.
All right. No, that was it. I just wanted to know if we were creating an additional possible thing we could trip over. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point. Can somebody ask to invalidate? I mean, committees make recommendations, with the exception of obviously a few other, Plan Commission has some final decisions, but most committee actions are just recommendations. So they're not really binding. Do we need to worry about or think about that idea of, if the Plan Commission meets at the, on a, particular holiday, could somebody argue that they weren't supposed to, and whatever decision was made needs to be relitigated? Attorney Haas, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I don't think it would affect the validity of any decisions or recommendations that are made. And particularly if it's that objection is not raised at the time of the meeting.
Got it. Thank you. Alder Foster.
It seems to me that we can and should use sort of access to city resources as a control mechanism for this. So if the council passes via ordinance saying it's not allowed, in order for a public meeting to happen, we need to have, we have to notice it. The clerk's office needs to post it on the wall at CCB. And to me, if we pass an ordinance saying this can't happen, I think all staff, whether it's the, whoever's facilitating the meeting or would be the clerk's office, et cetera, I guess I would expect that they're not going to participate in breaking the ordinance by noticing a meeting that's not supposed to happen. So, I mean, as long as it's sort of known that it's not supposed to happen, I think it would be appropriate to have that expectation. The question of if it happens without anybody knowing it, does it invalidate the results? I mean, I guess that's a different question, but I guess I would feel comfortable not like penalizing or sanctioning or something, but I think it's effectively worked this way in the past, that staff is I think as Attorney Haas said, has acted as a control mechanism, and I don't want to put it on them, but as long as we've got really good published no meeting dates that everybody knows about and that are comprehensive, it seems like it would be easy to just not get stuff put into Legistar and not get stuff posted, and then meetings aren't really going to happen unless the members go totally rogue and go down to the terrace and hold a meeting that they're not supposed to.
Yeah, I think the concern is that these things get lost. I mean, obviously, we already had an ordinance on the book that told people that they couldn't meet on Yom Kippur, for example, and there were a ton of committees that were going to meet anyway. And so, yes, we definitely will make sure that the clerk is playing a role in helping enforce that. And I know the council office has a whole list now of holidays out for at least the next 5 years that we're going to distribute and make sure that's very much part of the process. Less committees would help too. I don't know if you're aware of the drive for that. Any other, you have a question, Alder Foster? I apologize. I probably should have interrupted you. We're trying to stick to questions, but.
Okay, yeah, I missed that, but I guess if anything, I would say let's just put more energy into making sure we've got that comprehensive list and everybody's got access to it. And I think that'll avoid the issues that we've been seeing.
Thank you. Alder Heck.
I do not have a question. I just have a point to make. Is that allowed?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead. We'll move into that.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that I assume that, the vast majority of our ordinances that permit or forbid certain things have no penalties associated with them. It's just the way it is. And so I don't think we need to consider that.
Perhaps a subcommittee. Alder Heck, since you have the floor, do you want to talk about your opinion on what to do about that budget question? Because I think that was a really good thing to be brought up. And, frankly, we should just probably do a substitute and provide some clarity. I'm curious if other people as well have some opinion on whether or not we should be including those informational sessions as well.
I've been at the informational sessions this fall, and honestly, the Finance Committee informational sessions were not particularly well attended by alders, but they are recorded and available. And I guess I feel in some ways like for those particular meetings, there could be other meetings held. That's just my first guess, but I'm certainly open to other suggestions.
And any worries about staff availability?
Oh, that's a good point. Since so many departments are presenting at those meetings, that's a really good point. Anybody that held a meeting would certainly have to work it out in advance. And I assume that, for instance, the Police and Fire Commission holding meetings as they did this fall on those days is, they don't really eat up a lot of staff from anybody other than police and fire, and not likely leadership that would be making presentations or their finance people. But again, there's kind of you assume that committees aren't going to have a disconnect between their staff members and the committee's doings, but I guess that's not always the case, and you can't always predict what's going to be on a committee agenda in advance. So that might be a good point.
So I don't know the right answer, but I wanted to at least throw that out there. I mean, I don't know if we want to. I would suggest that we just do it for the amendment meetings, and I think we are probably excluding so many meetings because of holidays, which I think was absolutely appropriate. I think excluding 4 additional days because of presentations when they are recorded, as you pointed out, is good. I think the only disadvantage is alders won't have the opportunity to ask questions those days, but I've always argued you don't need to ask questions there because there's email and ability to talk to staff as well. So anybody have any strong feelings if we slightly modify this just to say that it's the days that the amendments are happening opposed to the informational sessions? So does somebody want to make a motion maybe with that? Vice President Curry, you were not unmuted, but I believe you were trying to be helpful.
I was waiting for the folks who were talking more to, I'll second.
So Alder Heck, are you going to make that motion then? Is that what just happened?
I was looking back at the proposal so I could make an intelligent amendment. I mean, intelligent motion, but if I can say, what we said, I move.
So move approval with, a modification that the Finance Committee meetings are the ones where amendments are being considered, and I'll figure out the exact language with staff, and we'll make sure that's what's in front of the council as a substitute.
And are we striking the redundant part?
No.
Okay.
I think it's helpful to leave that all in one place.
All right. That's my motion. Sure.
And it's been seconded by Vice President Curry. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I will assume approval by unanimous consent. That was one of the more simpler things on our agenda. So let's see how the next ones go. The next item is Legislative File 73988, amending Section 2.0510 of the Madison General Ordinance to simplify the consent agenda process. The change that's being proposed here is to make the consent agenda just be focused on what's different from the consent agenda document, be just focused on what's different from the agenda. So very specifically, you would use the consent agenda document to see when there is a referral or recommendation or an exclusion that wouldn't be on the agenda. And so the big thing that we're removing is the listing of public hearing items and their recommended actions, things that are requiring supermajorities. And we're taking out that clarification of additional recommendations because we're just saying recommendations or referrals not printed on the agenda. And obviously it still says and exclusions requested by noon on the day of the council meeting. Thoughts, questions? We could combine both since this is pretty straightforward. Alder Heck.
So I'll ask about the motivation for this. Is it really just to avoid confusion by having items on the consent agenda that are not different than the printed agenda, mostly to avoid confusion and I suppose a little less work for council staff?
It's definitely less work for council staff. It's definitely less work for whoever the president is having to list all that stuff. And I think the focus is to be a little bit more narrow about what the document does. If we, for example, leave out a 15-vote item, that shouldn't negate the fact that there was a 15-vote item because it's on the agenda. So it's really it's to take a complication out of the process. I mean, I will say. And I may actually start doing this soon. If alders are interested, contact me. And this is even alders that aren't on CCEC. If you want to experience what the creation of the agenda is, reach out. I'd love to show people what that is. It is way more complicated than I ever thought it was. There are so many moving pieces. And so I think this is just one taking away one unnecessary, in my opinion, moving piece.
Can you remind me if when the consent agenda is currently, the items excluded, the mayor actually reads all the items, including the 15-vote items. Is that right?
The mayor likes to summarize it, and she does it a little bit different each time. So sometimes she'll actually read the full item. Sometimes she'll just give I think at our last meeting, she just gave the item numbers. But I think because it's so long, and I think she likes to, make it a little bit simpler after the president is done with that. I do think long term, the council probably just needs to figure out a process there. Obviously, I will note that I've tried to make the titles, for example, much shorter, and that's always an interesting game of how can I shorten it and still have it make sense. But yes, I think the mayor is reading still those 15-vote items and reading, summarizing what's in the consent agenda from another level, consent agenda document from another level of what the president does.
So those 15-vote items that are not excluded would not be mentioned at the meeting if they remained on the consent agenda, and I think that's just fine. Which other items would possibly no longer be read? The public hearings would still be read if they're
excluded. And so we have adjusted for that pretty dramatically. We used to do a much bigger deal about the public hearing items. We have now put them all on the consent agenda. We do have a small note that says, numbers 3 through 10 are public hearing. But that's obviously clearly noted on the agenda. And if somebody wants to pull a public hearing item, it would be on exclusion.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Alder Foster.
I was just going to say, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I also see it more than just sort of a sort of small efficiency or something. And think it also is really important in terms of just providing clarity for alders, quite honestly. I mean, the longer that document is and the amount that we read and everything else, the more risk there is that someone's struggling figuring out where we're at or what the important pieces to focus on are. And then I think that same thing translates to the general public. And I'm just really thrilled that we've moved the consent agenda process to be more public, to publish that. And I think there especially, again, we might all be able to understand and filter out and ignore the parts where we're talking about extra majority, et cetera, but it's just more likely going to confuse members of the public as well. Like, why is this on here? Does that mean that it is going to be excluded, that it's not? So I'm very supportive of it. And I wanted to point out that I think it's actually important for clear understanding for everybody involved, with both members of the council as well as members of the public.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Figueroa Cole.
I don't know if it was the English as a second language for me, but the document that is sent out to summarize the consent agenda that has all the colorful things on it. I struggled with that for so long. I couldn't understand why this is a consent agenda when it really was an exclusion list. So I'm really hoping that the changes that we're making on the ordinance are reflected also on that form, and we change the naming and the title of it and take so much detail that was unnecessary in there. Like that form it was, and the email, the template email, so confusing. It took me a long time to understand that was what's left for us to discuss. So that is not the consent agenda. It was a consent agenda process, and I couldn't make. It took me a long time to make sense of that. A lot of Googling. So if we can please change that form too, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, I've been working with council staff, really trying to figure out how to simplify it. So, for example, now, it's very clear in the header what that document does. So you'll notice a few times this evening I went to say consent agenda, but that's not what it is. I mean, it's a consent agenda document. The consent agenda is the process. It's the whole. It's what we're voting on, and these are the differences. So this helps summarize it. But one of the things that's also notable that what we'll do once this passes is there's a lot of discussion back and forth during the creation of the consent agenda about what header something goes under, and that gets very confusing. And so, for example, is this a recommendation from the floor? Is this something different? I mean, there are all sorts of different headers, and I apologize for not coming up with all them. But like there are times where like I'll go back and forth with staff where we actually will have a friendly disagreement on where it actually fits, and ultimately it doesn't matter. What matters is it being readable and not being confusing for alders in the public. And so we'll continue to work on tweaks once this is done on what are the right headers, and very, 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 very eager for people to give feedback. So if you want to mail Liz and myself on, hey, could we use this type of header instead, and of having 3 different sections to look at, for example, we're more than happy to hear that. But it's confusing, and hopefully this will help make it better.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole. Any other questions, concerns, thoughts? Not seeing any. Can I get a motion?
Okay, I can motion this one. Hold on. Let me go and read it. Or not. Oh, yeah, I found it. Okay, so move to have to amend the section 2.0510 of the Madison General Ordinance to simplify the consent agenda process.
Second.
Thank you. I don't see any objection. I will assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, the next item on our agenda is probably one of the more complicated items on our agenda for the evening. But luckily, I don't have to do anything other than to turn it over to Alder Foster. That item is 74141. It's to update terms. Grant will talk more, Alder Foster will talk more about that. And I haven't been mentioning, but obviously all these items are items that were referred to us this evening. So Alder Foster, whenever you're ready, if you want to talk about this change.
You got it. Yeah, so this is basically a continuation of the conversation that we have had here a couple times. What I ended up putting in for the proposal is actually based on feedback that came out of this group last time. I think I was leaning more towards 4-year terms, staggered terms. And based on some of the feedback I heard here, I felt like 3-year terms might be more representative of what folks were interested and comfortable with. So that's what I asked to be drafted up. It does include the staggering, so essentially a third of the council each year of those 3 years. I did group the districts into rough geographic areas, so sort of east, central, south, and west. Essentially, the idea there is just to help mitigate maybe some of the impacts of loss of publicity, news coverage, for when that's not part of the mayoral election years. And at least this way, I think it'll give members of the press, neighborhood groups, et cetera, an opportunity to sort of hold on to something that feels a little bit less random of which seats are up again, and just know that, oh yeah, it's all the east side ones or the west side ones. So that was the intent for how those were selected in terms of which ones start with the 1 or the 2 or the 3 to get that staggering. That was pretty much just random, and the attorney's office, put them in there, and that's the way they are. And I think that pretty much covers it. So would, I guess, be open to any questions or feedback, and hopefully the end result is reflective of kind of where folks are at, and will be interesting to hear from folks.
Lots of hands. That's great. Alder Heck, go ahead.
Thanks. A question for Alder Foster. If this were to go into effect as described, how often would there be elections that would coincide with no other elections, whether it's county or state or national even? It seems they might coincide with some election somewhere, but let's say in Dane County, or do you know if some of these would be kind of out on their own occasionally? I couldn't remember if your charts from before made that clear. I can't remember. I mean, it seems like some of them will coincide, sometimes with mayoral elections. Some will coincide with other elections.
Yeah. So right now, I think the big for local elections, the obvious is every 2 years city, every 2 years county. So every year there's one of those two, right? The number of seats up, or for some districts, for some residents, they may not have. I mean, they'll always be on there, but they could be uncontested, et cetera. So, and then the mayoral is every other of the sort of the city side. So if you assume that the every 2 year city ones are replaced by this, you'll still have the county, every 2 years, unless they made a change. And then you would have the mayoral every 4 years, which is off cycle from that. So essentially 3 out of the 4 years, you would have either a county election or a mayoral election. So then you would kind of be down to 1 out of 4 years, potentially. The only thing that would be on the local election would be a third of the Alder seats. So probably not super dissimilar, but Alder Paulson is going to correct me and explain what's up.
Yeah, there's always going to be a school board, which isn't exactly coterminous with city, but mostly is. And then Dane County judges are up in the spring as well. And I think there's enough of them that there's always a Dane County judge up. And then state Supreme Court, 7 out of 10 years, there's a statewide Supreme Court race. So there's a fair amount going on. I don't think there will ever be an instance where the only thing is Madison Alder.
Okay, thanks. That's good information. That was my
and
question.
Maybe a referendum question on marijuana or something on there.
Thank you both. Alder, for your roll call, go ahead.
I was just wondering if we can get some of that background information up on Legistar. The table that you had for the staggering of the terms and the information that Alder Paulson just provided. Right now, there's nothing attached to the resolution.
I can certainly share an updated version of the kind of chart that I had pulled together. I don't know, maybe the clerk's office would be able to pull in information for other kind of regularly occurring elections.
I think it would be easier for, when people ask, so I can have visuals to discuss with them if I need to, without me having to replicate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Paulson.
I think my main kind of hang up right now is actually the geographic staggering. And I sort of get, why, maybe it's to build some excitement, though I'm not sure that the news coverage is driven too much by that, maybe some of the neighborhood stuff. But the downside, I think, is that it risks sort of a big wipeout in one area. And I know at least I was very helped by having stability kind of all around me. And I got a lot of help from the immediately neighboring alders. And so I kind of wish that the stagger was sort of actually the exact opposite, that we try to spread out each seat or each kind of part of the city as much as possible. So we only elect kind of 1/3 of the east side and 1/3 of downtown and 1/3 of the west side in any given year. So most of it isn't. So there's never a risk of a great big changeover. I think that's a big part of the staggering, is also just to sort of ensure some continuity and to have folks on the border of your districts that haven't changed, I think is actually a pretty powerful and useful thing. So that would be my kind of pushback on this. So.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Conklin.
Thank you, President Furman. And I'm going to have to concur with Alder Paulson. I think of just like, it should be more of a mix of having the districts, not just all the east side, all the west side. I think it would make a little bit more sense if we staggered it as in the districts as well. And then I do have just like kind of one point of clarification. So when you say like in the 2025 election, these districts will have a 1-year term, and then so they'll be up for re-election in one more year, so 2026, but then if they get elected, then they're on for 3 years. Is that correct? And so that's how you see staggering it that way, so not everyone's running a campaign at the same time. Is that correct?
I mean, so the long-term goal is that 1/3 of the seats are up for election every year. The way to get there from our current system is somebody gets, draws a short straw or the long straw and gets only 1 year. And then once that happens, it's 3 moving forward, and same thing with the 2 or 3. So it's really just a mechanism to convert from where we're at now to getting that staggered. And we could also, instead of having a 1 year, you could give those people a 4-year term and then get on the right cycle. But then we've got a 4-year term, which I think some folks were feeling uncomfortable with.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, I understand that now. So that's clear. But yeah, I definitely think that with the 1/3 changing over, it should be 2 from each side of town, or some sort of mixture, just not one all east, all west, all south, so that I definitely think that should be changed. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Conklin. I don't like things when there's not one right answer. Alder, go ahead.
First, a question in jest. Is the short straw a 1-year term or a 3-year term?
Yes.
I guess I'm thinking about the 1-year term, and I don't have an alternative, but I can imagine where that would be kind of annoying for that 33% of council that ends up having to run for election essentially for the first year of their term. I realize you don't really do that, but officially, but it would be a time sink, but I don't know of a solution to that. And I'm sure you've thought a lot about this, and the 4 years is not feasible.
I think that's the only other solution, right? Is 4 years.
I'm sort of thinking out loud. I don't really have a solution.
Need to bring solutions all their heck, but thank you. I'll throw in my 2 cents. I do agree that there's advantages to having existing alders in your area. I did not think about that too hard. So I think I probably agree with Alder Conklin and Alder Paulson's points on that maybe we should do the division a little bit differently. I don't know what that looks like, and that probably does not need to be figured out this evening. We could probably give a recommendation if we wanted to say to the sponsors, please rework this for the Tuesday council meeting so we can pass something different. But Alder Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
Just on regards to the 1, 3 versus 4 year thing. I mean, if we pass this today, whoever is going to be running in the future will be informed enough to know, like, it's not like this is going to happen with us right now, right? Like we're on our seat, don't have no choice. Whoever runs will know that this will be coming down the pipe, and they should be prepared to accept that. What, like Patrick's saying, the short or the long, however they want to take it. But it's at least they know, if we pass it now, they'll know. With the referendum, they know ahead of time what is coming down. So I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't get hung up on that part too much, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think we'll have to do a good job. I will say from personal experience, elections are not easy. I don't think they're supposed to be easy. But asking somebody to run for 1 year and go through all the questionnaires, go through the door knocking, go through the expenses of a campaign. That's a lot. But as I think Alder Foster pointed out, the only thing I can think of is making it 4 instead of 1. Alder Conklin.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw this in real quick. Maybe some of the veterans should maybe possibly be on the 1 year term, like i.e. Alder Verveer. Just because he may be more familiar with the campaigning instead of really bringing in somebody in 2023. And, let's say they get reelected in 2025. I don't think it's quite fair to have them run again immediately, so I think that may, how we split that up, how we do the 1 year terms and 2 year terms, maybe according to veterans and rookies per se. Just a thought.
Yeah, Alder, I think that's really hard to figure out who's going to be the Alder in that year. That's still pretty far off. We've got a few elections from there. So I think trying to determine and back kind of back into that, I think would be really, really complicated. I'm actually inclined to say 4 years. Personally, I don't know if anybody else is willing to go there, but I think elections are not easy, especially when you're doing the job to do both. Alder Foster.
Yeah, I was actually just going to ask folks what their opinions were on that. I could go either way. I do think there's a point of, a 1 year term is pretty, it's something. And so I think if other folks agree, we could, just for that one, subset, do 4 year terms instead of 1. I'm sure there's drawbacks to it, but I guess if other folks are on board with that, I think that would be worth considering. And in terms of the change to the kind of groupings, I also don't have any objections to changing that. So if whoever makes a motion to recommend approval, if they wanted to add that in there, I think we could easily get a substitute pulled together for council based on that, and then also potentially the change from 1 to 4 if others are inclined.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Paulson.
I think a 4 year term is a little tough sell. We have to go out and kind of explain to the community, hey, well, we thought 1 year was a little too hard for alders who have to go vote for an election. I just don't think that's going to go over very well. And I think the least bad option might be the 1 year term. And Fitchburg did it when they switched to staggered. They just said, well, some alders are going to have to do a election after 1 year. And depending on when you're, on a vacancy, depending on when you're appointed, if there had been a vacancy early on, you have to go, you're back up to an election, and then you could potentially have to run again a year later to fill that out. So, I mean, it's not, it kind of isn't great, but I don't think it's unprecedented. So I would recommend keeping it easier and going to a 1, 2, 3 initial stagger to get out there rather than going to a 2, 3, 4, is I think what we do, or we could do a 3, 4, 5 as well. But I think 1, 2, 3 is the simpler and better way, and is what is going to be an easier sell to the public.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Alder Heck, go ahead.
Thanks. I think I agree with Alder Paulson, and I think he used the right term. It's the least bad option to do 1-year term. And I think primarily of District 8 and the concerns that were voiced by Alder Bennett about 4-year terms, eliminating a lot of students from the equation. And, I don't think it'd be fair for us to carve out District 8 and say that's not going to be one of the 4-year districts. So I think it is the least bad to stick with 1.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Any other thoughts on this difficult question? Alder Paulson, go ahead.
Actually, I'll just wait to see what Alder
Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
I was just going back to how difficult elections are. They are difficult regardless of their difficult period. They're difficult if, or they're easier if, or they are whatever. They're just difficult. So I don't think that should be the reason not to go with the 1 year. I think the way that is set up already, that is being presented, makes sense. And I will support something like that. I will support the 1 year over the 4 year.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole. Alder Conklin.
I support the 4 years. Being in this role, we know realistically nobody can get anything done in 1 year. I think that's a setup for failure almost. And I think we've already had this conversation of 2 years versus a 4-year term. And I've always been a supporter of 4-year term because as a new alder coming in, not familiar, not ever having to do anything like this before, I'm coming up on 2 years and I'm just now starting to feel comfortable about what's going on, how the city operates and things like that. So I support 4 years. If that's the way we have to go, I think that is legitimate for folks to actually get something done in 1 year. That is not realistic, especially for a brand new person that has no clue of what's going on. I don't think that that's quite fair. And like we've already stated, we know how difficult campaign is, how much time and effort and energy that takes. So for them to come in and know that you're basically sitting down in November and in 6 more months, you have to start campaigning again, I don't think that that's successful for people, in my opinion.
Thank you, Alder Conklin. Alder Paulson, go ahead.
I have one last, not maybe making a motion, I can't make a motion anyway, but maybe not a request, but just a thing to think about. And unfortunately, Alder Conklin is going to hate this. I don't quite know what to take away from the last set of referendum because it was sort of a bunch of different questions. And I think it was animated mostly by sort of opposition to a full-time council. But one of the questions on that ballot was, should it be a 4-year term or a 2-year term? And the 2-year term won on that one. So just kind of thinking about what's likely to pass. If what recommendation, if we put something on the ballot, what do we think is going to pass? I'm reasonably certain that that the voters would support switching us to a staggered set of terms. I'm less convinced, though still reasonably confident, that they would support going to 3-year terms. But if we wanted to get staggered, if we said staggered was the most important thing to do, then I think the thing that would almost certainly pass is 2-year term staggered. And I'm just a little less confident in 3-year terms staggered passing, though I'm still pretty confident in it passing. So long as it's one question, I think we're okay. But I think 2-year staggers is a slam dunk, and 3-year staggers is a pretty good bet, but not quite as good of a slam dunk as the 2-year one.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Alder Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
I mean, I honestly have to say, I wouldn't even waste my time or the time of the public if we're just going to stick with the 2 years. 2 years is just simply not enough time to get what we need to get. So if we are going to even consider going back to 2 years, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, I can't support something like that. So I think if it passes, fine. If it doesn't pass, fine too. But if we are going to put this to the public, let's make an actual change and either pick the 3-year or the 4-year, whatever that might be. But it's being stuck on the 2 years, it doesn't make any difference then.
But Alder, you would prefer, when we have to do the weirdness, doing 1 rather than 4, though, right?
1, 4. I mean, again, like I said, elections are hard not only on the people that are sitting on these seats right now, they're hard on the people that didn't make it to the seat. So
and their families and the community, so and people who are spending money on it, et cetera, absolutely.
Yep. So it's not just that it's hard on us that are here, it's hard on the people that run against us. I mean, I don't see that being a big issue. I don't know. So I'll go either way. I prefer the 1 year, moving on, having people. I mean, there might be people there that just wants to test, to take it for a test drive and say, okay, I'm willing to come here for 1 year. I don't know, and then drop. But I don't know. So
Alder, do we want? I mean, is that the best use of everybody's resources? Somebody coming to this job who knows nothing about it for a year.
I just don't think that we should be using that campaigns are difficult to make this decision of 1 and 4. That's what I'm saying. I don't know.
Sure.
But I firmly also saying that if we're going to take this to the public, it should not be just the status quo of 2 years. That's
Thank you.
what I am with that.
Yep, and I appreciate you letting me push back a little bit. Thank you, Alder Conklin.
Okay, this is probably going to be the last thing I'm going to say on this, but I understand that it did not pass last time on the referendum for the 4-year term. But also, I think we need to educate people. You know what I'm saying? Like, I might not have voted for 4-year terms if I've never been in this position either. You know what I'm saying? So I think it really relies on us to let our constituents know and have them fully understand how difficult a campaign is and how slow the city works and how folks can't get anything done with this 2-year term, that, how important it is to get it to either 3 years or one or a couple districts may have to do the 4-year term just for one time. You know what I'm saying? So for us, I think it comes down to is that we need to educate our constituents on how difficult of a job that this is and how much we need more time to get things done and how it's not really realistic to get anything done in 1 year. But I do agree with Alder Figueroa Cole. Yeah, 1-year terms for someone who may just want to try it out, that would be great. But, are we really on a tryout basis? Are we really going to get anything done overall in general? So that's it.
Thank you, Alder Conklin. Vice President Curry.
Thank you. I just wanted to add some foreshadowing. I mean, that's coming up before us pretty soon with getting ready for new Alder orientation and that coming to CCEC. I think at least what I know of in focusing on infrastructure and sustainability of the role, hopefully that will change some of the dynamics that folks are experiencing, knowing that our last cohort started virtually, et cetera, et cetera. But with all that said, I do agree with, I feel like the majority here is saying 1 year doesn't make sense for the amount of work of everything. And I would lean more towards 4.
Alder, since you have the floor, would you like to make a motion?
No.
Well done. Would somebody else like to make a motion based on the feedback that we've heard this evening? Alder Heck.
No, but I have a question.
Sure, please. Yeah.
If we were to approve the 4-year option, would it be possible to say that District 8 would not be one of the 4-year? I mean, it's like a strange little carve out, but and how folks would interpret that, they'd have to be educated, as Alder Conklin said. It's messy, but
Alder Foster, do you want to address your thoughts on that?
Well, first, I would just make a motion perhaps to recommend approval with 2 updates. One is to reconfigure the groupings so that they have geographic distribution as opposed to geographic alignment. And the second would be to change it from 1, 2, 3 staggered to 2, 3, 4 for the initial transition.
Somebody want to second that? Alder Conklin, is that a second?
I was gonna say I would second that, but did we throw in with the exception of District 8 in the 4-year?
I think those instructions are clear. We're not actually giving direct instructions on here's how the configuration is. I think the person who does the configuration will be the person who sponsored this, which is Alder Foster, and I think that message was probably loudly received by him.
Okay, so yes, I do second what Alder Foster said.
Okay, so we've got a motion on the table. Discussion. Alder Figueroa, call.
I'm good. I was just, I'm trying to not found it. Lower my hand button. Thank you.
Yep. Alder Paulson, go ahead.
I think a 2, 3, 4 stagger puts this at risk of not passing in the referendum. I think there will be more media pushback, and I think this is I think this puts it more at risk, and I would urge you to leave it at a 1, 2, 3. I think that's more likely to pass at the referendum.
Thank you, Alder Paulson. Any other discussion? Alder Figueroa, call.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should just move it along and put it on the floor of the council. And if the majority wants to go one way or the other, then we'll tackle it there. Because I think we all have here. Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with Alder Paulson. It's just like I think we should just move it onto the group of 20 and figure it out there.
Thank you, Alder Foster.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation from Alder Figueroa Cole, and also would just say, I mean, it depends, I guess, how coverage happens, but my expectation is that there will be clarity that this is primarily a question of moving from 2-year terms to 3-year staggered terms, and the question of how that's implemented with the stagger, I don't expect it will get as much attention as perhaps we've given it here tonight with the public. So I think it's a fair point that is raised by Alder Paulson, but I also don't think that it will actually probably shift people's thinking on whether they want to move from the current state to a 3-year staggered. So, but in either way, I would agree with it, Alder Figueroa Cole, and think we can have that debate at council, and that amendment could happen there.
Thank you, Alder. If somebody would like a roll call, could you just raise your hand and I'll do a roll call? But if I don't see that, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. All right, not seeing any hands, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. I will say that I delayed approving the agenda for this evening based on this evening, and it sounds like I'm going to have to approve the agenda with things coming up from the floor, which is fine. But don't expect necessarily to see those final changes that we're approving tonight on the agenda that will be introduced from the floor. I suggest that I will certainly work with staff that we get that out as quickly as possible, but I won't be delaying the approval of the council agenda tomorrow because I just think we're going to need some time to enter this in Legistar and get it right. So just a heads up on that. Our next item is Legislative File 74328, which is correcting an issue with how we do nominations and picks for the Police Civilian Oversight Board. We found out this year that there is a somewhat of a flaw in our system. Essentially, we ask organizations to give us 3 names. And it turns out if they don't give us 3 names, we can't appoint anybody. And so we're pretty much stuck leaving that seat unfilled. And so that was something that I don't think anybody expected not to happen. That organization may not give us 3 names. Luckily this year we were able to find ways to get those organizations to 3. But I think in the future, if we're not able to, we don't want to be at a complete standstill. So this ordinance change suggests a process where mayor and council leadership, which is what happens with organizational community-based organization nominations, would make an appointment from the pool of all eligible applications. So I don't know if that was a good explanation. I think the ordinance does a decent job of explaining that, but if somebody wants me to get into it more or wants Attorney Haas to get into explanation on this more than happy to do so. Alder Heck.
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but I just wanted to verify that if an organization submits, let's say, only 1 candidate or no candidates, the eligible pool is all the remaining applicants. It's not just those from that organization, right?
Correct. So it would be so if they submit 2 and we need a 3rd, we can look at the people that just generally applied, or we could pick one of their 2. So okay. it expands the pool to look at, and so I think that it gives a little bit more choice.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Alder Figueroa Cole.
We're gonna ask that question again. Okay, so just to make sure, it is exactly the same question. So if we have 2 people from one organization, we could potentially, if we have 3 people from one organization, we could potentially pick those 3 people to be on the board. They don't necessarily mean that they all represent the organization. We just fill in the board with people that are interested in serving.
So if we don't have
enough people, right?
If we don't have enough people.
Yeah.
So if an organization decides to just give us 1 or 2 people, and we
they give us 3 people, right?
If they give us 3, we're going to pick from those 3. We're gonna pick somebody from that. But if they don't give us 3, this is what this helps correct. It gives us a mechanism for filling that seat, whether it's from those 2 or a 3rd individual that we take from the general pool.
Okay, so we pick 1 from these 3. Now we still have open seats. We can come back to those other 2 and grab them also for appointment. Okay,
absolutely. The council can, and that's exactly what's happening this time. Is we have 2 organizations that ultimately did have 3. It was a little bit hard to get it from one of them, but we got it. And then all the people that didn't get picked from those organizations, the mayor looked at that pool. She picked a person, and then the council is now going to get everybody that's left, including for the suggestions from those organizations that weren't picked.
Thank you. I know it's the same question. I just.
Alder, this is complicated, and if it has to be explained in several different ways, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's taken a lot for me to wrap my arms around it because there's so much going on with this. So I get it. I'm happy to help. Any other questions, discussions on this? Not seeing any. Can I just get a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Unless I see otherwise, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. Great. Our next item on the agenda is 71800, which is our Chief of Staff Oversight Performance and Review Process. This is something that honestly has been a long time that I've been trying to get it on the agenda, but we've had a ton of things. But if people recall, we did change our ordinance early around April, May, somewhere around there, where CCEC is supposed to be taking a role in providing feedback to our chief of staff, and the purpose of this really is for us all to have an understanding of what's going on, what are our expectations, and also very importantly, what does she want from us? And so this evening, Karen has put together some information on her work plan, and she's going to share that with us. Hopefully, people have had an opportunity to look at some of the information that's been sent previously, and I'm hopeful we could have a discussion on what's there. If people think that something's missing, certainly let her know. If they think something's on there that shouldn't be on there, let her know as well. So this is intended to be fairly interactive. So don't be shy. I think Karen obviously wants to know what we're expecting of her, and we certainly, if she has any questions, will certainly ask us that this evening as well. So hopefully that's a good introduction, Karen. Take it away.
Would you like me to start with the Chief of Staff or the Council Office work plan?
I think my preference would be Chief of Staff.
All right, will do. I will share that. Okay. So this is what I sent you. So anyone can start anywhere. I framed it basically along the lines of the position description with the addition of the onboarding section. Obviously, that's not in the position description, but I had a little bit of trouble I decided to identify some ongoing things that really are not, they're never going to be done. It's not really, CCEC staffing. It's not a concrete timed project, for example, but I will open it up for feedback. And you know.
Alder Heck, go ahead.
Thanks. First, Karen, thanks for this. It was really great to see this. I don't really have any criticisms or anything like that. I do have a question about the policy development, analysis, and implementation section. Since we've hired staff to work on legislative development, this is policy as it pertains to the council office and the council itself? Is that how you envision that?
It's a good question. I was just going off of the position description. And so if you want me to, I can certainly pop over to that and look and see what y'all have in there. We can take a look at it if that would be helpful.
Actually, that would be if that's easy to do. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll do that. And then I should say, I think it's attached to our agenda. Let me see which one this is. I'm popping it. Okay,
Common Council Chief of Staff.
I don't know if that's actually, I'm going to find the more detailed one that I have. It's not as helpful as the one that I
see
was given. Hang on just one sec. But yeah, I do agree that I was thinking about that because a lot of the special projects that I had been doing, I'm transitioning either to someone else or out of completely because it makes sense with staffing. Give me one moment while I search for this file.
Sure. And I understand it's kind of difficult to figure out what should be in that slot in particular. And some of it are things that you're kind of keeping a watchful eye on and helping with, but there might be staff that's actually kind of responsible for moving it along. So it's kind of hard to decide what good. Maybe it's going to end up being a catch-all.
So I think that's actually pretty good thinking in some respects, because if you read these, they're very much about an approach and on the spot or as things develop. issues. So yeah, there it is. There's one more
Yeah.
on the bottom here, which is special projects for CCEC.
Yeah, given what you're just showing us, I think what you did was appropriate. I'll have to think about it a little bit though, and it may be, yeah, like the first one, review resolutions or ordinance modifications where appropriate. Wow, maybe it's often inappropriate for you to be doing that. I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, and I think also just want to add some of these tie into broader council office projects that I've identified in a work plan. We're doing a lot of thinking about documentation and process improvement and so on and so forth. Communication improvement, since we have our new community engagement strategist, who I'll introduce at a later item. Some of these things I think are also will be part of her work, and sort of fleshed out in particular ways. This has a lot of room. So if someone has a project that they say, look, I think it fits in number 5 and it's really important that we do X, I think it would be probably fleshed out that way as a combination, maybe a team effort, maybe, one of the other staff leads and so on and so forth. So yeah. Do you want me to close this out and go back to the work plan, or
let's see if Alder Foster has a follow-up. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Before we go to Alder Foster, I just wanted to point out, I don't know what the cadence is going to be, but I don't expect us to go for this long again without talking about this. So this is supposed to be a dynamic plan. So just know that this won't be the last time we talk about the work plan. I don't want Karen to be like, 6 months from now, go, well, I didn't know you wanted something different, or vice versa. So FYI, this won't be the last time. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. And I think that's a really important point you made. So it's I'm excited about having this touch point between CCC and the chief of staff, and it being a dynamic document seems like the only way to go. I was just going to offer up, since I was a member of the work group that came up with the position description, the way that we were thinking about it in discussion with HR was that in some ways, sort of the full responsibilities of the department, the Office of the Common Council, needed to be represented within the sort of duties and accountability of the chief of staff, understanding that how those are carried out could be 99% by other staff within the department, but ultimately the chief of staff is still responsible and accountable for them to happen. So I think that's maybe some explanation for what this category is. And I think it does not require or assume that the chief of staff personally is managing projects in any regard, but I think it's the overall sort of the process and ensuring that it's happening. So I think in the future, this category could include things like just reviewing how that's working, and our alders that need support getting the support they need, how is the council staff managing, prioritizing things, et cetera. So just wanted to offer that up as to kind of what this area was meant to cover within the position description.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, dad jokes, anything?
I'll put us back on the work plan here. I just was taking quick notes for what Alder Foster was saying. I'll pause here for a moment, and then I can show you the council office work plan.
Alder Conklin, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So again, myself, I am most interested in the BCCs and working that and figuring that out. And I see that that's not really started or anything. So is this the point of where I can volunteer, or how are we going about getting this started? That's what I want to know. And what kind of help or support do you need to get this started?
It's a great question. So just a little bit of an insight into my brain. I front-loaded hiring as my first priority effort. maybe for obvious reasons.
As
And
you should.
just so everyone's aware, I did make some decisions about priorities, and that was one of them. Try to get everybody hired. And now that everybody's hired and they're in process of being onboarded, this is actually something I just reached out to Christy Baumel, and I'm looking for times to re-up the admin support team so that we can start working on reviewing and revising the plan and making, scheduling those team meetings. So I plan to have that scheduled within the next couple of weeks, but I'm being honest, and I hadn't done it yet. So it stayed not started, but is absolutely, because it's crucial. And in fact, I'm finding situations that are coming up that would really benefit from that organization again. So it's a priority of mine as well. And then I also want to think a little bit about who comes to the table on that. Right now, the resolution is written as department. There's a number of department heads that are in it, but I've found that it may be nice to have some folks besides me who do a lot of staffing, like literally do the staffing, so that, who come to the table as well. So that's something that I have been sort of thinking about. I'm not sure if it requires a resolution amendment or if it just is something that I can reach out to folks and bring them on in addition. I guess that's up for discussion. But one thing I've noticed is that not everybody at the director level has direct experience with the staffing or the Legistar or the minutia of committee work. And I find that to be, at least in my experience, to be pretty enlightening, having had that experience. So yes, absolutely. And if you'd like more, if you have other thoughts on what you want to see in there before April, let me know. I'm going to re-engage. I'm going to start really soon. I have to be honest that a lot of work, I expect the whole office to be putting a lot of work into prepping for the orientation season and election season to make sure everyone understands the 50-piece rule, all the things, and things move pretty fast once we get through budget. Then there's this, once the first of the year. So I don't want to overpromise either. And then, however, I want to point out something because you'll say, oh, this goes till April. What's up with that? So part of what I was thinking there is I wanted to give you a good 12 months so you can feel like we've gotten something done, and April is really a logical point. However, I want to point out that I've been invited to be part of this Performance Excellence Department work plan pilot, where they help us really think about work planning and work through work planning. So we get trained on all this to think about that in strategic planning so that I can hopefully come back with an additional set of things that go past April. I think, to be honest, there's been so much change and so many new folks and things to think about. And really, I feel sometimes like we are trying to address issues that have been issues for a while now, get up to speed so that, cross-training is another thing. It's not something that I personally have to spend all my time on, but I have to make sure it happens, things like that. I feel like we're working. I want to kind of catch up and get our deficits covered. We've been in crisis mode for a long time, as you know, and I really want to get out of crisis mode as much as we possibly can. So I have been pretty focused on that foundational piece, not to say that I'm not more than happy to develop it more. So.
No, Karen, thank you so much for everything that you have done. I just want to, and you have every right to obviously want to be fully staffed before we take on more and more and more, and we're stretched thin and all this other stuff. So this may be also a good point where I can tell you that Rebecca Hoyt and Julie Austin both have already reached out to me wanting to kind of be a part of the reforming of the BCCs. So please add them to your list and bring them on if at all possible.
Thank you.
I do want to note, and we'll talk about this more in the next item. I think we'll probably have a bigger discussion about this at our next CCEC meeting. There'll be some updates that I think are, hopefully Karen can have prepared. And I know there's some updates on the work that I'm doing that we'll be able to share by then as well. So thank you, Alder Conklin, for bringing that up. And thank you, Karen, for your answers. Alder Figueroa Cole.
I really like this format as a tool to measure goals and accomplishments, and to make sure that we are going on the right path. But with regards to what Foster was saying earlier on the description that contains the 6 items, review resolutions, maintain neutral positions, whatever those classifications were. Are we putting something in place to measure, to ensure that the expectations are met and that people are not abusing the process or the systems that we're putting in place? I was in those meetings also when the position was put on, and they were, there were ideas out there that were pretty far off on what the role of that office should be. And I think it got real back to, no, we're not doing that. But I just want to make sure that we have things in place that empowers the office to say, no, we don't, that is not part of our standard goals. You know what I mean? Do you have something like that in place, or planning on putting something like that in place?
Well, I'd like to hear more about what that looks like. I mean, I think right now what we're doing as a team is working out what we have capacity to do, what seems reasonable, what seems sustainable, and what seems like something we can provide in an equitable fashion, right? And so that's pretty live. We have weekly staff meetings where we bring these things to the table. I also have weekly individual check-ins with the staff, and so with the arrival of the new folks, we've, especially Larissa's position, we've been having those types of conversations more often. I do think that, as you know, we have quite a variety of different ideas amongst the 20 alders as to what anything should be, or how it should be done, or how quickly it should be done, or by whom. And so one of the things I asked Larissa to do, because I think because Larissa's is the new position, we don't really have something to fall back on as easily. I asked her, when she's meeting with each individual alder, to get their thoughts, record, document their thoughts, so that and then bring it back to me, bring it back to the team, use her professional judgment, and we'll build, and we're, to think about what we're going to what we're building out, what we're not building out. And I think that most likely folks will have differences of opinion as to when we settle, what we settle on. I'm not expecting a complete 20 alder consensus. But my goal here is with this to be able to, Larissa will be providing me with proposals and pitches and ideas, and I'd like to be bringing them here. I like to be bringing them to leadership. And I'd like to pilot some things, give some things a try. So we have to balance between being able to run the department, right? Like I should be able to run the department, but also providing lots of opportunities for input from this body in particular, right? So it's sort of a balance. But that's the way that I've been thinking about it. And they just got here last week, but Larissa's already working on a couple of things. In fact, I just spoke to leadership about discussing the social media policy issue, which was brought up by the communication tools president's work group that Alder Foster was, and Alder Heck, I believe, were quite involved in. And that's just an example of something that I would like to request to have this body revisit, kind of along the lines of what you're talking about. in terms of where our capacity lies, what's an appropriate thing to do, and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get ongoing feedback, but I appreciate that because I would like to be bringing things to you from the staff when these issues arise, particularly with Larissa's role. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that the office has been running in fumes without staff. And I really will hate to see now that it's fully staffed to have people then also be overextending themselves because people's expectations are not cleared. You know what I mean? Like I think it's important that we manage those expectations as soon as possible. So thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Alder, for your roll call. Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about the office work plan?
Yes, I will switch us over to that. It is a lot about onboarding right now, as you might imagine. Hiring, woo-hoo, we did it. We have the biggest office ever right now. And we're all getting used to that. We have hybrid work schedules in place, but even so, y'all can come visit us and see that we've got spot for 5 people in that office. And then I gave you some details of some of the things we're onboarding for each person. And then I provide down here some team plans. We are giving the council policy guide a thorough facelift at first, and then we're going to be coming to you all with some suggestions for perhaps additions and so on and so forth. In addition, sort of if there's a policy that we need you to weigh in on, vote on, for example. Plus, I believe the whole thing is going to come to you for approval, even with our facelift. So right now, I don't know if anyone knows that it exists. Many of the documents are outdated. The council has made changes that aren't reflected in there, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't really recognize the post-COVID reality. And we're going to make it, the vision for this is to make it interactive and make it more of an actual document that the alders can actually use and find useful and reference. So that's the big vision. I'll come back with something concrete. We are working on process documentation and process improvements. As folks know, some folks know, we found ourselves with very few documents for some of the positions. And given that we want to have a smoother, anytime we just want to have a smoother transition, if folks go, folks join, and Liz Windsor is working on that, especially for her role as she's onboarding. She's also working on process documentation, and that's the big one because her position, as you can tell from even just this list of onboarding things, is very detail oriented and very step by step. So we're working on that. And we're also looking at ways to make things clearer and smoother. You all know about all of our collective effort to work on onboarding, offboarding training plan. I met with leadership or with President Furman and Alder Figueroa Cole. Today, we're going to keep that going. I know this group is also working on it, so I see this as a big team effort. And then I had mentioned that cross-training is really important to me. It's something that didn't quite get completely implemented in the past, and we've suffered for it, in my opinion. And so as we're doing onboarding and as we're thinking about documentation and so on and so forth, we are absolutely prioritizing cross-training so that at least 2, if not 3, if not everybody knows how to do, depending on what of other people's jobs, so that anyone can go on vacation. You know, we could get to this point where someone can actually go on vacation and the job keeps moving because the rest of us pick up the slack and so on and so forth. Someone decides to leave us and go do something else. we aren't left scrambling trying to figure out how to then now do this thing that no one has ever, So this is really important to me. And I'm also, I built in professional development into the new folks onboarding, having them go to the city trainings that are available to them. And there's additional training that I am going to provide to the community engagement strategist, et cetera, et cetera. Point is, that's kind of an ongoing thing. We'll be done with the cross training at some point, but the professional development will be ongoing. I could talk about that in more detail, but that is the general gist of what we wanted to get done by April. And we'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Karen. Any other questions, thoughts, discussions? All right, so we will move on to our next agenda item, which is a council office update. So Karen, you're up again.
I'm just looking for if you'd like me to screen share the update, but you all.
Sure, it's pretty short.
Okay, let me find that. Thought I had it, but then I must, oh, here we go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to the new folks, and I'm going to let them talk about themselves a little bit and their work and what you can expect in the coming few weeks here. So this is a pretty short and sweet one. We did it, as I said earlier. They're here. They're great. They're reaching out to you. Thank you for the ongoing patience. I know it's been really tough to hear us tell you that we can't do something as fast as you'd like and so on. I'm going to be sending out a survey, by the way, to the folks who attended the de-escalation and active shooter response trainings. I want to get some feedback from the folks who did come about what they found valuable, what they missed, what they needed, etc. I'm also going to be reaching out to all the alders who were not able to make it to hopefully find out a little bit more about what the barriers are and how we can make this more accessible in the future. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're coming up on election season, and it has some impacts on how alders can communicate and also spend their expense accounts, et cetera. So we're working on putting together some guidance on that as well. So you can expect to see things like that pretty soon. So this one's just pretty straightforward. So I'd like to introduce our new community engagement strategist, that's Larissa Banuelos, and our new legislative analyst, which is Katie Yeager. Either one of you can.
Sure, I can go. How much time do I have?
25 minutes. No, as long as you would like.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so Larissa Banuelos, I have a background in marketing. I have a lot of experience with economic development, communications, and business development. And then I have held two DEI roles in my life as well. So born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. Spent the last year working for a nonprofit as their director of marketing. Learned a lot there. But then prior to that, I spent 7 years in Green Bay working as the director of marketing and investor relations for the Economic Development Corporation up there. And then working for the chamber and then an executive search company where I was focusing on attracting and retaining diverse talent in corporate companies that were primarily in the northeastern Wisconsin area. So with that being said, I think one of the biggest things that I'm very passionate about, particular in this role, is the community engagement aspect, but reaching populations that are that for whatever reason are just not engaging within legislation, that are not engaging with our common council. So Yes, so to promote civic engagement within those groups, and then also to assist you, all of you, with your communications and improve communication tools, so that way we can kind of streamline efforts, and then streamline and promote the work that you guys are doing for your districts, but also collectively for the city.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome. Katie, go ahead.
Great, thank you. My name is Katie Yeager. I use she, her pronouns. I started out after graduating college in nonprofit. I worked with populations who were justice involved and did cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy with groups of individuals who struggled with substance use disorder. Kind of saw a lot of the societal flaws where folks were falling through the cracks institutionally, and became interested in policy through my work there. Moved to Madison to pursue politics. Worked for a little while in homeless services and was involved with the Homeless Services Consortium, where I met Vice President. Good to see you again in this capacity. I eventually was able to get a job working in the state capitol. I worked for a legislator representing parts of Madison for a little while, and then for about 2.5 years worked for a legislator representing the near west side of Milwaukee. My policy portfolio in that office included criminal justice reform, expansion and revamping of various government programs. And I got to work on some local government policy, specifically attempting to increase shared revenue. Got to kind of nerd out on some really wonky policy there, which I really like to do. So I was interested in this role to get to really dive into policy specifically. In the state legislature, I was doing some admin, some communications, and a lot of policy. So I'm looking forward to being able to focus on policy at the local level. I really like to research and also discuss kind of in the weeds stuff. And my favorite thing is being able to take something that is really complicated policy and then translate it into more digestible memos, presentations, formats for others to be able to understand and consume a little bit more easily. So I'm looking forward to working with the council on any of your legislative initiatives that you would like help researching. I also really like to discuss it. So anytime you want to give me a call, I'm happy to send over memos for you, and then also have a follow-up meeting or a call to really dive in and discuss what we find. And yeah, happy to answer any kind of questions. And I also thank you for your patience in advance as I get acclimated and we get into an office flow with a new fully staffed office. So thank you so much for having me and giving me the space to talk a little bit about myself.
I know I can, on behalf of everybody, welcome you both very much. And we're really excited to work with you and really grateful to have you guys on board. If anybody has any questions, I've already welcomed them on behalf of everybody, so everybody doesn't need to do that. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I certainly encourage everybody on CCEC as well as any alders that are watching to reach out and meet. I know I have scheduled time and look forward to sitting down and getting a more one-on-one introduction. But again, welcome. All right, we will move on to our last item on the agenda, which is our future agenda items. I think I'm just going to kind of, give you a little bit of an idea of what I have in mind for our next meeting, which is on the 10th. and see if anybody has any suggestions. We still have some big topics that are remaining that we will see over the next few months of CCEC meetings, but those are getting smaller and smaller, which is good. So I think, for our next meeting, I'm hopeful to have an update on the BCC reorganization, where we are with that process. Alder Foster and I have been talking about some stuff there and expect to have some additional work done for discussion and for some guidance on next steps at our next CCEC meeting. We'll talk hopefully a little bit about the administrative team if that's ready on the BCC stuff. I think the social media policy is probably really important to get a good discussion going on that. We'll make sure that what exists now is distributed, as well as some clarification on whether or not it has actually just been suggested or is a recommendation. And figure out next steps and some of the complications with that. I'd like to bring back the honoring resolution discussion. I have some thoughts on how to move forward with that, and want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with that moving forward. So, what we could talk a little bit more about that, and possibly the other stuff, just so people know that are not some of the bigger long-standing stuff, would be a little bit more about the council agenda creation and deadlines. We have a weird council conference policy that we should talk about at some point. And then obviously we have the new Alder onboarding training and mentor program. And I was just letting everybody know that I'll be sending out a doodle soon so we could do an overdue finalization of the 2023 CCEC schedule. I already know that a bunch of people are going to be grumpy with whatever I end up picking, and that probably is why I haven't sent out a doodle sooner, but we need to finalize dates for CCEC for the remaining part of the term. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings, hopefully in the next year in 2023 before the term is up. So that's my quick update on things to look for in the next few agendas. I obviously will make sure that we're sticking to our hour and a half, 2 hours max. If it goes over a little bit, but will not overload us in our next meeting on November 10th. But if anybody has any suggestions or want to see things either at our next meeting or further out, you're welcome to tell me that now, or certainly shoot me a note. Not seeing any feedback. Alder Conklin, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you said November 10th was our next meeting?
That's correct.
Is that at 5:30?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions? And I will happily entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Can I get a second? All right, unless I see otherwise, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent and wish everybody a good evening. Thank you all. Good night.